I'll marry the bride no one wants." The words fell across the grand ballroom like a stone dropped into still water, and for one long second, nobody breathed. Ethan Carter stood beneath the crystal chandeliers, wearing a plain charcoal suit that looked almost painfully simple among the polished tuxedos and glittering gowns surrounding him. At the far end of the room, Claire Bennett stood alone beside the empty wedding altar, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She had just been rejected in front of everyone. The man who was supposed to marry her had stepped away minutes earlier, declaring that he could not bind his future to a woman his family considered a disgrace. Whispers had spread through the ballroom like cold wind. Claire had heard every one of them. She kept her chin lifted anyway. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Then Ethan stepped forward. He was the man nobody had invited to the center of the room. The outcast. The quiet stranger who had spent the last year living on the edge of the community, working with his hands and keeping his past to himself. People laughed when they saw him approach Claire. Someone near the back whispered that he had finally lost his mind. Ethan heard it. He simply kept walking. Claire looked at him, confusion replacing the hurt in her eyes. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly. Ethan stopped a few feet away. His expression remained calm, but there was something strangely familiar in the way he looked at her, as though he had noticed her long before tonight. "Because everyone here is looking at what they think you are," he said. "I'm looking at who you are." The ballroom grew quieter. Claire swallowed. No one had spoken to her like that in months. Ethan extended his hand. "You don't need to marry me tonight," he said. "But if you want someone who won't be ashamed to stand beside you, I will." Claire stared at his hand. Around them, the whispers continued, but they seemed farther away now. She finally placed her hand in his. A murmur swept through the room. Ethan looked toward the people who had mocked them both, and for the first time, something changed in his eyes. It was not anger. It was certainty. What none of them knew was that Ethan had not come to that ballroom looking for a bride. He had come because a secret from his past had finally begun to surface, a secret powerful enough to change everything they believed about him. And before the night was over, the people laughing at the outcast would begin asking themselves one terrifying question: who, exactly, was Ethan Carter? Claire had spent years learning how to disappear without ever leaving the room. She knew how to lower her voice when certain family members entered, how to smile when someone made a cruel remark, and how to keep her hand steady when another invitation arrived without her name on it. But as she stood beside Ethan in the ballroom that evening, she realized something she had not expected. She did not feel invisible anymore. Ethan's hand had remained near hers, not possessive, not demanding, simply steady, as if he were giving her the choice to stay or walk away. "You do not have to do this," Claire whispered. Ethan looked at her. "Neither do you." That answer unsettled her more than anything else could have. He was not asking her to trust him blindly. He was giving her room to decide. Across the ballroom, Claire's family watched in stunned silence. Her aunt, Victoria Bennett, finally stepped forward. "Claire, think carefully. You barely know this man." Claire almost laughed. For years, nobody had cared whether she knew the people who judged her. Yet now, suddenly, everyone was concerned about her choices. Ethan remained silent. His calmness seemed to make the room even louder. Claire studied him carefully. There was something unusual about him. His posture was too composed for someone accustomed to being dismissed. His eyes moved across the ballroom with quiet awareness, noticing every person, every doorway, every whispered conversation. He did not look impressed by the expensive chandeliers, the polished marble floor, or the long table covered with crystal glasses. He looked as though he had seen places like this before and simply had no reason to be impressed. "Where did you grow up?" Claire asked quietly. "Here and there," Ethan replied. "That is not an answer." A faint smile touched his face. "It is the only answer I can give you tonight." Before Claire could respond, an elderly man near the entrance suddenly stopped walking. His gaze had landed on Ethan. The man was Harold Mason, one of the oldest members of the community council, a person known for remembering every important family history. His face changed for only a moment, but Claire noticed it. Recognition. Then uncertainty. Then something almost like fear. Harold quickly looked away. Ethan noticed too. His expression did not change. "Do you know him?" Claire asked. "No," Ethan said. The answer came too quickly. Claire said nothing, but she remembered it. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, she found Ethan standing alone near one of the tall windows. Moonlight stretched across the marble floor behind him. He looked different without the crowd around him. Less like an outcast. More like someone waiting for something he already knew was coming. "Why did you choose me?" Claire asked again. Ethan turned toward her. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he quietly answered, "Because I know what it feels like when everyone decides your worth before they ever learn your story." Claire felt something tighten in her chest. She understood that answer. Perhaps more than anyone else in that room ever could. What she did not know was that Ethan was not the only one carrying a hidden story. Her own past had a missing chapter, and somewhere beyond the walls of that quiet estate, someone had just realized that the woman everyone had rejected was now standing beside the one person they had spent years trying to find. By the following morning, the ballroom had become a place of quiet whispers. The guests were gone, but their questions remained in every corner of the estate. Claire woke before sunrise, unable to forget the expression on Harold Mason's face when he had looked at Ethan. She found Ethan in the kitchen, standing beside a cup of coffee as though he had been awake for hours. "You knew him," she said. Ethan looked up. "I knew of him." Claire folded her arms. "That is not what I saw last night." For the first time, Ethan seemed almost amused. "You notice more than people think. People usually underestimate me." "I know." The answer came so naturally that Claire paused. "How?" Ethan looked toward the window. Morning light spilled across the wooden table, turning the steam above his coffee silver. "Because I have been watching how they treat you." Claire did not know whether to feel comforted or concerned. Before she could ask another question, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Harold Mason entered the kitchen carrying an old leather folder. The moment he saw Ethan, he stopped. His fingers tightened around the folder. "You should not be here," Harold said quietly. Ethan remained still. "Neither should you." Claire looked between them. "What is going on?" Harold's eyes moved toward her. His expression softened. "You deserve to know." Ethan shook his head once. "Not yet." Harold looked frustrated, but he obeyed. He placed the folder on the table and walked away without another word. Claire waited until the door closed. "Not yet," she repeated. Ethan finally looked at her. "There are things about my past that I need to explain carefully." "Then explain them." "I will." He reached for the folder but did not open it. "When the time is right." Claire sighed. "You realize that makes me even more suspicious." A quiet smile appeared on his face. "I was hoping you would say that." For the rest of the morning, Claire tried to continue with her ordinary routine, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every small detail seemed connected to Ethan. The way older members of the community watched him from a distance. The way some people lowered their voices when he entered a room. The way Harold had carried that folder as if it contained a piece of history that had been waiting for years to be found. Then Claire noticed something else. On the inside of Ethan's wrist was a faint silver mark, almost hidden beneath his sleeve. It looked like an old symbol, made of a circle surrounded by 3 narrow lines. She had seen it before. Not on a person, but in one of her grandmother's old books. It had been described as a symbol belonging to a royal bloodline that had disappeared long ago. Claire stared at it. Ethan noticed. He slowly pulled his sleeve down. "Where did you get that?" she asked. His eyes met hers. The warmth disappeared from his expression, replaced by something guarded and ancient. "Claire," he said quietly, "there are questions you should not ask until you are ready for the answers." She looked at him for several seconds. "Then I suppose you should start preparing me." Outside, a car stopped at the estate gates. 3 unfamiliar vehicles followed behind it. Ethan turned toward the window, and for the first time since Claire had met him, his calm expression completely disappeared. He knew exactly who had arrived. And somewhere in the back of that old leather folder, a name that had been missing from the community records for years was about to be written again. The 3 vehicles stopped beneath the tall iron gates just after 8 in the morning. Claire stood near the window, watching several unfamiliar people step onto the estate grounds. They were not dressed like ordinary visitors. Their coats were dark, their movements quiet, and each carried the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever they went. Ethan remained beside the window, perfectly still. "Who are they?" Claire asked. He did not answer immediately. His eyes followed an older woman as she walked toward the entrance. She wore a deep blue coat and carried a small wooden box against her chest. "They came for me," Ethan finally said. Claire turned toward him. "Why?" Ethan looked at the old leather folder on the kitchen table. "Because someone found out that I am here." Before Claire could ask what that meant, the front door opened. Harold Mason entered with the older woman behind him. She looked directly at Ethan, and something in her expression changed. Her eyes filled with disbelief. She whispered a name Claire had never heard before. "Alexander." Ethan's face remained calm, but Claire saw his shoulders stiffen. "My name is Ethan." The woman shook her head slowly. "That is the name you have used. It is not the name you were born with." Silence settled over the room. Claire looked from one face to another. Harold placed the leather folder on the table and opened it carefully. Inside were several faded photographs, old documents, and a small silver emblem matching the mark Claire had seen on Ethan's wrist. She leaned closer. One photograph showed a young man standing beside a woman and an elderly man. The young man looked remarkably like Ethan. The woman pointed to him. "This photograph was taken 20 years ago." Claire looked at Ethan. "Who is that?" He did not answer. The older woman placed the wooden box on the table. "We have searched for you for years." Ethan finally spoke. "You should have stopped searching." Her eyes filled with sadness. "We could not." Claire felt the room growing smaller around her. The man she had agreed to marry only hours earlier was surrounded by people who spoke as though his life belonged to a history far greater than she had imagined. Then Harold removed one final document from the folder. It carried an old seal at the top and a handwritten name beneath it. Claire read the first line and froze. It was the same name the older woman had whispered. Alexander Carter. Beneath it were words describing a royal heir who had vanished from public life years ago. Claire looked at Ethan. "You were not an outcast by birth." Ethan lowered his eyes. "No." "Then why did you let everyone believe you were?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because being forgotten was safer than being found." Claire felt a chill move through her, but not from fear. She was beginning to understand that Ethan had never been hiding because he was ashamed of who he was. He had been hiding because someone, somewhere, had wanted his identity to remain buried. The older woman opened the wooden box and revealed a silver crown emblem, worn by time but still unmistakably regal. Ethan looked at it without touching it. Then she turned to Claire. "There is something else you need to know." Claire waited. The woman glanced at Ethan before speaking. "He did not choose you by accident." Ethan's eyes lifted sharply. Claire's heart began to race. "What does that mean?" The woman took a slow breath. Your family has been connected to his family for generations. Outside, the morning sun disappeared behind a passing cloud. And for the first time, Claire wondered whether their unexpected marriage had truly begun in that ballroom, or whether someone had been guiding their paths toward each other long before either of them knew why. Claire stared at the silver emblem on the table, unable to make sense of the words she had just heard. My family has been connected to his family for generations, she asked. The older woman nodded slowly. Your grandmother knew the truth. She was one of the few people who knew what happened when Alexander disappeared. Ethan looked toward the window. She promised never to speak about it. Claire felt a sudden weight settle over her. Her grandmother had always been careful about the past. Whenever Claire asked about old family stories, the answers were brief, almost rehearsed. Now those memories seemed different. The old woman opened another section of the leather folder and removed a faded letter. The paper was yellow with age, but the handwriting remained clear. Claire recognized it immediately. It belonged to her grandmother. Her hands trembled as she read the first few lines. The letter spoke of a child who had been hidden away for his own protection, a child whose identity could never be revealed until the right moment. There was no name in the letter, only a symbol matching the one on Ethan's wrist. Claire looked at him. She knew you were alive. Ethan nodded. She knew where I was. Why did she never tell me? Because she believed the less you knew, the safer you would be. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. Suddenly, the years of strange silences in her family made sense. The old photographs that had disappeared from albums. The questions her grandmother never answered. The warning she had once given Claire when she was 17, never let anyone convince you that your family history is worthless. Claire had thought it was simply an old woman's advice. Now she understood it had been a warning. Ethan moved closer to the table, but he did not touch the documents. I never wanted you involved in this. Claire looked at him. But I am involved now. He nodded. Yes. And you knew something about my family before you asked me to marry you. Ethan's silence answered her. Claire felt hurt, but beneath that hurt was another feeling. Curiosity. How long, she asked. How long did you know? Ethan took a slow breath. I learned your family name 3 months ago. Claire's eyes widened. 3 months. He nodded. I came here because I needed answers about my past. I did not expect to meet you. The room became quiet again. Then Claire noticed something written on the back of the old letter. A single sentence had been added beneath her grandmother's signature. If the lost heir ever returns, he must not reclaim the crown alone. Claire read it twice. Her voice became barely audible. What does that mean? Ethan looked at the sentence for a long moment. I do not know. But Claire knew he was not telling the whole truth. Before she could press him, Harold stepped toward the window. His face had gone pale. They are here. Everyone turned. Beyond the estate gates, more vehicles had arrived. This time, people were carrying the same silver emblem Claire had just seen on the table. Ethan looked at Claire, and the quiet certainty in his eyes returned. Whatever happens next, he said, stay beside me only if you choose to. Claire reached for his hand. I already chose. And somewhere beyond the gates, the people who had spent years searching for the missing heir had finally discovered where he was. The gates opened just after noon, and a quiet procession entered the estate. There were no raised voices, no hurried movements, only the measured sound of footsteps crossing the stone courtyard. Claire stood beside Ethan near the tall windows, watching the visitors approach. Every person carried the same silver emblem. Harold lowered his voice. They are representatives of the old council. Claire looked at Ethan. The council that believed you were gone. Ethan nodded. For 20 years. The older woman stepped forward first. Her name was Eleanor Grant, keeper of the royal records. Behind her stood 7 members of the council, each dressed formally, each carrying an expression that mixed relief with uncertainty. Eleanor stopped several feet from Ethan. "We have waited a long time for this day." Ethan did not move. "You should not have come." "We had no choice," Eleanor replied. "The records have been verified. The bloodline has been confirmed. The seal has been recognized." Claire felt her heart beat faster. Harold opened the old leather folder again. This time, he removed a document bearing a faded royal crest. He placed it on the table. "There is no longer any reasonable doubt," he said. "Alexander Carter is the missing heir." Claire looked at Ethan. The name seemed to change the air around him. He was still the same man who had stood beside her in the ballroom, still the same quiet person who had offered her his hand when everyone else had turned away. Yet suddenly, the years of mystery seemed to fall into place. Ethan finally spoke. "I left that life because I did not want a crown." Eleanor's expression softened. "You did not leave because you wanted freedom. You left because you believed the kingdom needed time to heal." Ethan looked down at the silver emblem. "I was young." "You were 18, Eleanor said. "And you were carrying a responsibility no 18-year-old should have carried." Claire listened silently. She realized that Ethan had not been pretending to be humble. He had built an ordinary life because he wanted to be judged by his character rather than his family name. Then Eleanor turned toward Claire. "There is one more matter." Claire straightened. "What is it?" Eleanor opened a second document. "Your marriage to Ethan has changed the succession." Claire looked confused. "I did not marry him for a title." "We know," Eleanor said. "That is precisely why your name matters." Ethan stepped forward. "Enough. Claire does not owe the council anything." Eleanor nodded. "And that is why she may be the first person worthy of standing beside you." The room fell silent. Claire looked at Ethan. For the first time, she saw not an outcast, but a man who had spent years refusing to let power define him. Yet something still bothered her. "If you are really the lost heir," she asked, "why are you still afraid to return?" Ethan's eyes moved toward the distant hills beyond the estate. "Because returning means facing the people who benefited from my absence." He paused. "And because once I accept the crown, there will be no ordinary life left for either of us." Claire considered his words. Then she reached for his hand. "You gave me a choice yesterday. Now I am giving you one." Ethan looked at her. "What choice?" "You do not have to face it alone." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Eleanor lowered her eyes, understanding what had just happened. Ethan had spent 20 years believing that returning to the throne meant losing the quiet life he had built. He had never considered that someone might willingly walk beside him into that future. Then a messenger entered the room and placed one final envelope on the table. The seal belonged to the royal council. Ethan opened it, read the first line, and went completely still. Claire watched his expression change. "What does it say?" Ethan slowly folded the letter. "They are asking me to return to the capital." The capital was nearly 900 miles away, but the distance was not what frightened Claire. It was the meaning behind Ethan's silence after reading the council's letter. He stood by the window for several minutes, holding the envelope in one hand while the afternoon light stretched across the floor. "You do not have to go," Claire said. Ethan looked at her. "If I refuse, someone else will make the decision for me." Eleanor nodded quietly. "The council can preserve the kingdom for a time, but only the rightful heir can restore the old order." Claire studied Ethan's face. He looked less like a mysterious stranger now and more like a man standing at the edge of a life he had deliberately left behind. "What happens if you return?" she asked. Eleanor answered carefully. "You will be asked to reclaim your position. There will be ceremonies, council meetings, public recognition, and difficult decisions. But there is something else. She looked at Claire. Everyone will want to know who stands beside him. Claire understood immediately. Her marriage, which had begun as an unexpected promise between two rejected people, had suddenly become a matter of public importance. Later that evening, Claire found Ethan outside beneath the wide porch. The air was cool, and the distant hills were covered in fading sunlight. "You are thinking about leaving without me," she said. Ethan turned. "I was thinking about protecting you." Claire shook her head. "You keep deciding what is best for me." He lowered his eyes. "I know." "Then stop." Her voice was gentle, but firm. "You gave me a choice when everyone else took mine away. I am giving you the same choice now." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Claire, the life waiting in the capital is not simple. Neither was the life I had before I met you." He almost smiled. "You really are not afraid of much." "I am afraid of being forgotten again," she admitted. "But I am more afraid of watching someone I care about walk into a future alone." Ethan was silent. Then he reached into his coat and removed the small silver emblem that had once belonged to his family. He placed it in her hand. "My grandmother gave this to me when I was a child," he said. "She told me it represented responsibility, not privilege." Claire looked down at the emblem. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because if I return, I want to remember why I chose to return." Her eyes met his. "And why is that?" Ethan answered quietly. "Because you were the first person who saw me without a title." The next morning, the estate prepared for their journey. News had already begun spreading through the community. People who had ignored Claire now suddenly wanted to speak with her. Some offered congratulations. Others offered polite apologies. Claire accepted neither with excitement nor bitterness. She simply thanked them and continued walking. Before they left, Harold approached Ethan privately. "There is one thing you should know." Ethan waited. Harold lowered his voice. "Not everyone in the capital believes the lost heir should return." Ethan nodded. "I expected that. And some believe Claire should not stand beside you." Ethan looked toward Claire, who was speaking with Eleanor near the entrance. "Then they will have to meet her before they decide what she is worth." Harold smiled faintly. "You sound like your grandfather." Ethan looked down for a moment. "I never knew him." "He would have been proud of you." The words lingered. Then the car doors closed, and Ethan and Claire began the long journey toward the capital. Neither knew what waited there. But somewhere ahead, an entire kingdom was preparing to meet the man it had believed was lost forever. And for the first time, Ethan was not returning as the frightened 18-year-old who had disappeared from history. He was returning as the man Claire had chosen before she ever knew his name. The capital appeared beyond the hills just after sunset, its towers glowing beneath a violet sky. Claire watched the city through the car window, trying to imagine Ethan standing at the center of it all. He had spent years avoiding attention, yet thousands of people were now waiting for him. When the gates of the royal estate opened, the atmosphere changed. Guards stood along the marble steps, council members gathered beneath the columns, and a crowd had formed beyond the courtyard. Ethan stepped from the car first, then turned and offered Claire his hand. She took it without hesitation. A hush moved through the crowd. Some people bowed immediately. Others simply stared. Claire could feel every eye on her, but Ethan did not let go of her hand. Eleanor stepped forward. "Welcome home, Your Highness." Ethan looked toward the palace entrance. It has been a long time. Inside, everything felt strangely familiar to him. The polished stone floors, the tall portraits, the silver emblems displayed along the walls. Ethan walked slowly, recognizing places he had not seen since childhood. Claire stayed beside him. Then they entered the council chamber. 7 officials sat around a long wooden table, and at the center was an empty chair beneath the royal crest. One of the council members stood Before we recognize the heir, there is a matter that must be settled. Ethan remained calm. Go on. The man looked toward Claire. The royal position requires a consort with an established family history. Claire's expression remained composed, but Ethan's eyes hardened with disappointment. My marriage is not a council decision. Another member spoke. We are not questioning your feelings. We are questioning whether she can represent the kingdom. Claire finally stepped forward. Then perhaps you should ask me what I believe before deciding what I can represent. The room became quiet. Ethan looked at her with unmistakable pride. Claire continued, I was rejected by people who believed status made them better than me. I will not spend my life proving that I deserve respect. I will simply treat others with the respect I once wished to receive. No one answered immediately. Eleanor lowered her gaze, hiding a small smile. Then Harold entered carrying the old leather folder. He placed it on the table and opened the final record. The family requirement has already been satisfied, he said. Claire Bennett's grandmother was formally recognized as a trusted member of the royal household. The council members exchanged surprised looks. Ethan turned toward Claire. She looked just as shocked. Her grandmother had kept another secret. Harold continued, the records show that Claire's family protected the royal line during the years of uncertainty. Her family did not lose its place. It simply chose silence. The room fell completely still. Ethan stepped toward Claire. You never needed to prove anything. She looked at him. Neither did you. The council slowly rose. One by one, they bowed to Ethan. Then Eleanor turned toward Claire and offered the same respect. Your place beside him was never created by his title, she said. It was earned long before either of you understood why. Ethan looked around the chamber, then back at Claire. He could have chosen someone with a famous name, a powerful family, and years of royal training. Instead, he had chosen the woman who had taken his hand when she believed he was nobody. And now, before the entire kingdom, he made his decision clear. If I accept the crown, Ethan said, I will not accept it by leaving her behind. Claire's eyes filled with quiet emotion. The council chamber remained silent. For years, everyone had believed Ethan needed to become someone worthy of the throne. But as he stood beside Claire, they began to understand something different. Perhaps the throne was not changing Ethan. Perhaps Ethan was returning to change the throne. 3 months later, the palace no longer felt like a place Ethan had returned to. It felt like a place he had chosen to rebuild. The ceremony had ended, the council had accepted his claim, and the kingdom had finally recognized the man who had disappeared from its history 20 years earlier. Yet on one quiet morning, Ethan stood alone in the same grand hall where Claire had first been rejected. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, touching the marble floor with warm gold. Claire entered wearing a simple ivory dress, and Ethan turned toward her with the same calm expression he had worn when he first offered her his hand. You remember this place, Claire said. Every detail. She looked toward the altar. It feels different now. Ethan smiled. Because you are standing here by choice. Claire walked toward him. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had never spoken that night? Ethan considered the question. I would have returned to the capital eventually. And me? You would still have found your way. Claire smiled softly. You always say things like that. Because I believe them. Outside, the bells of the capital began to ring. The sound traveled across the palace grounds, announcing the beginning of another royal day. Ethan looked toward the windows, then back at Claire. There is something I have wanted to ask you. Claire raised an eyebrow. You are already my husband. He laughed quietly. I know. He reached into his coat and removed the small silver emblem his grandmother had once given him. He placed it in Claire's hand again. When I first met you, I thought I was choosing someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked. Claire looked down at the emblem. And now? Ethan's voice softened. Now I know I was choosing the person who would remind me why a crown matters. Claire looked at him for a long moment. A crown does not make someone worthy. I know. Then remember that. Every day. They walked together toward the balcony overlooking the city. Thousands of people moved through the streets below, living ordinary lives that had nothing to do with royal titles or ancient secrets. Ethan rested his hands on the stone railing. Claire stood beside him. Neither needed to say anything. The silence itself felt peaceful. Far below, the first royal banner of the new reign rose above the palace. It carried the familiar silver emblem, but beside it was another symbol, one representing partnership rather than power. Ethan looked at Claire. They used to think you were unwanted. Claire smiled. They were wrong. Very wrong. She looked toward the city. And they thought you were nobody. Ethan nodded. They were wrong about that too. Claire turned toward him. What are you now? Ethan smiled. Still Ethan. That answer was enough. He had not become a different man because the kingdom called him king. Claire had not become valuable because the kingdom called her queen. They had simply stopped allowing other people to define their worth. In the years that followed, the old stories changed. Children learned about the lost heir who returned after 20 years, but they also learned about the woman who stood beside him before anyone knew his true name. And whenever someone asked Ethan when his life truly changed, he never mentioned the crown, the palace, or the ceremony. He always remembered one quiet moment in a crowded ballroom, when everyone else had looked away from Claire and he had chosen to see her. That was the day two people who had been rejected found each other. And that was the day the kingdom learned that dignity does not come from a title, a family name, or a throne. It begins when someone looks at you and sees your worth before the world does.